bridge of the Vengeance didn't smell like a command center. It smelled like a locker room in a welding shop. Admiral Alara Vance watched the main view screen as a Zandari boarding pod slammed into the hull of a Union cruiser 3 sectors away, its serrated teeth grinding through reinforced titanium like a parasite burrowing into a soft belly. Thousands of years of civilized warfare had taught the Star Union to retreat when the math turned sour. But Alara wasn't looking at the math. She was looking at the heat signatures of Ethelgard burning in the background. A lush world turned into a charcoal marble. "Fire the Echo Phantoms," Alara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that usually comes when you're about to break every treaty in the known sectors. "And tell the boarding crews to sharpen their teeth. We are the children you forgot to fear." The transition was instantaneous. A ghost fleet of sensor ghosts bloomed across the Zandari scanners, 1,000 false signals flickering like a dying bulb. In the confusion, the Terran pod's ugly, blunt-nosed slugs of lead and hate launched from the belly of the Vengeance. They didn't use docking clamps, they used kinetic harpoons. It hadn't started with this much blood. Years ago, when the Star Union first cataloged the Terran remnant, they'd filed humanity away under primitive/resilient. We were the curiosities who lived on a world that tried to kill us every day. Yet we spent our time arguing over borders and radio frequencies. The Union ignored us because we were small, fractured, and loud. They assumed our internal squabbles were a permanent state of being. Then Ethelgard happened. The Zandari swarm didn't just invade, they harvested. Warlord Vaxon had made the mistake of thinking the infant species would scatter like birds if he killed enough of them. Instead, the millions of deaths acted like a sudden chilling frost that turned a puddle into a sheet of unbreakable ice. The political bickering stopped in a single afternoon. The quiet fire took hold a sociological snap where billions of people stopped being citizens of nations and became members of a single, grieving species. "Impact in 5 seconds, the tactical officer called out. His hands were steady, his eyes locked on the telemetry. He wasn't conquering his fear. He was functioning inside it, using the adrenaline to sharpen his focus into a needle. Ilara felt the ship shudder as the recoil of the main magnetic rails kicked back through the floor plates. They were outgunned 10-1. The Union admirals were probably watching from their safe observation posts, calculating the exact minute the Terran fleet would be wiped out. They didn't understand that humanity had spent the last decade bypassing the established laws of physics because we didn't have the luxury of time. We hadn't climbed the tech tree. We'd jumped from the bottom branch to the top using a rope made of sheer desperation. The first Terran pod punched through the bridge glass of Vaxon's flagship. No atmosphere venting, no elegant boarding tubes. Just a pressurized spike of steel and 20 humans with short-range shotguns and a very long memory of what happened on Ethelgard. The galaxy's greatest mistake was about to become its greatest lesson. The bridge of the Zandari flagship was a chaos of hissing atmosphere and reptilian screeches, but Alara didn't hear it through the comlink. She only heard the rhythmic, heavy thud of magnetic boots. On the main screen, the internal feed from boarding pod 1 flickered to life. A Terran soldier, his visor cracked and smeared with dark Zandari blood, shoved a kinetic dampener into the deck plating. The Zandari guards, twice the size of any human and armored in bioceramic scales, lunged with serrated polearms. They were faster, stronger, and backed by 1,000 years of imperial conquest. But the humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like a fever. They moved in pairs, covering every angle, functioning inside the fear rather than trying to outrun it. A shotgun blast echoed through the cramped corridor, the recoil sending the shooter backward in the low gravity, only for a teammate to catch him and shove him forward again. In the center of the command tier, Warlord Vaxon stood paralyzed. He had watched planets surrender at the mere sight of his silhouette. Now he watched a species he had dismissed as chattel tear through his elite guard with nothing but industrial tools and a grudge. The door to the inner sanctum buckled. It didn't melt or slide open. It was punched inward by a shaped charge. "Admiral," a voice crackled over Alara's headset. It was Sergeant Miller, breathless and raw. "We have the asset." The feed showed Miller standing over Vaxon. The warlord was hissed, his many-lidded eyes wide with a realization that came too late. Miller didn't kill him. He simply pressed a thermal link to the alien's throat, forcing the Zandari command net to broadcast the image to every ship in the sector. "The galaxy's greatest mistake," Alara whispered, watching the Zandari formation crumble as their leader was paraded in shackles, "just became its greatest lesson." Years later, the Star Union would try to reassert control. They viewed the Zandari defeat as a fluke of asymmetric luck. They assembled the tripartite armada, 12,000 ships, and moved towards Sol to stabilize the region. They expected a parley. They expected a young species to be intimidated by the sheer scale of a multi-system blockade. Instead, they found the Singularity Engine. Alara, older now and scarred by the weight of 1,000 decisions, stood on the deck of the Terra Eternal. She didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. The unity that had been forged in the ashes of Ethelgard had never cooled. "Initiate the fold," she commanded. The space in front of the tripartite armada didn't just bend, it broke. The Singularity Engine, a piece of impossible tech that bypassed every Union safety protocol, turned the vacuum into a hungry mouth. In a single heartbeat, the 12,000 ships weren't fighting a war, they were being unmade at the molecular level. It was a promise written in the ashes of 12,000 ships. Terra was no longer a remnant or an infant. They were the Death Worlders, the ones who had learned to bridge the stars, not with permission, but with the quiet fire of a species that refused to go out. The Union never came back. They finally understood that some children are better left alone in the dark, especially the ones who know how to turn the dark into a weapon.